Hey, everybody, this is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on Sports Illustrated, joined by my co-beat writer on Sports Illustrated of the Las Vegas Raiders, the great Ezekiel Trezevant. Zeke, good to have you today.
Hey, good to see you, Hondo. Good to be here.
We got a 6-inch wall between us here at the facility, but we both just walked out of practice. Um, Something has really struck me this week and we talked to all of the staff this week, literally every coach. We were in the locker room together. We're going to be in the locker room in a few minutes. We talked to AP. One thing has stood out for me, and I've obviously done this a lot longer than you, but I think it stood out to you. And for anyone asking, we don't go over topics before we do a podcast. We want it to be unnatural, like two guys sitting at a bar having a beer. Um, it it struck me there's no excuses here. I asked AP a question, no excuse. You asked uh, Patrick Graham, no excuses. That's something that I think when you're looking at the long-term viability of the franchise, that says a lot. And we're not making excuses. It's a complete disappointment at 2-8. They're a talented group of guys, but they're not a good football team. But that is a positive. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah, and I'll even take it a step further. And after I asked Patrick the question, and kind of, essentially, we're trying to throw these guys a rope a little bit in a sense, right? A lifesaver, if you will. And I asked Patrick the question, and he turned it down. He wouldn't take the bait. And there are two follow-up questions from other media members, along the same lines of, hey, half your defense is out. How do you work around it? And Patrick still would not take it. So he had plenty of chances to say, hey, I'm missing six of my defense or five or six of my defensive starters, cut me a break, and he still wouldn't do it, right? And so that speaks to how much these guys know, right? In terms of being in the NFL, they know injuries are common, and they also know that nobody wants to hear excuses being made. So they're just going out there, going to work.
Zeke, it was a very spirited day at practice. There's a lot of energy. That's not what you see in teams that have quit. But I'm going to tell you, after what I saw last week, with all the injuries, as knocked down as they are, it's hard for me to look at the schedule and peg a game and say that's for sure a W until they get some of this worked out. But the fact that the offense is improving, I know the fans don't want to hear that because they want to lose every game. But I think you and I both know in talking to coaches, players, and people in the organization, they're not even thinking losing or tanking, which I know is going to make people pull their hair out. But it's hard for me, even with the offense improving, to look at a game until I see them play a rounded game and just say that's a win. What do you think?
So I'll tell you, I had to kind of learn, earlier this season when you would ask me, hey, who do I think is going to win the game? I quickly had to learn that there's a difference between what they can do and what they will do. And to your point, I think they could win, especially if they're healthy. They could have won a lot of games this season, but if they're not
Wow.
healthy, right, a lot, right? So healthy or not, right, they've lost more games than expected. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I can't really say, hey, that game right there is going to be a win. I would say, and honestly, we don't know. They might beat Jacksonville. I think that's the one where I'm like, hey, if that's going to be a battle of two very bad teams, which can make for a good football game, right? Two bad teams make for good football games sometimes. So outside of Jacksonville, and even that's not a for sure, right? There are no for sures on this schedule remaining. But if there was one, I would say maybe the Jacksonville one, especially if Trevor Lawrence is not playing.
Well, I don't expect Trevor to play. And I'm going to tell you right now, we are going to officially start calling Jacksonville versus the Raiders the toilet bowl.
That's essentially what it is. I mean, it's the race for the number one pick, basically, is what it comes down to, or close to the number one pick. So it'll be interesting
Wouldn't that be the Raiders' luck, though, to
to,
win that
to
game,
win that game.
have
Yes.
have Jacksonville get the number one pick, and then trade it for somebody, and it happens to be the guy they want? That'd be just be Raiders' luck, wouldn't it?
Yes. I think that Raiders Jacksonville game is going to be reminiscent of the Vikings game last season, but with not nearly as good of defense being played both ways.
So I had a guy on my Twitter timeline last week when I was in Miami. Every other play, we suck. We're terrible. We're horrible. This is disgusting. The end of the game, great loss.
Yeah, fans don't always know what they want, and sometimes, I mean, again, that's part of being a fan too, right? Sometimes you have conflicting thoughts and ideas, and you have that right as a fan. So sounds about right.
We're not excuse makers here. We've never been. That's not the way we operate. Sports Illustrated's the largest sports media company in the world, and that's not how we operate. But it's impossible to talk about the failure of the season, and it has been a failure. You can't say it any other way, and not talk about injuries. But I've talked about those, so I want to move in a different direction. I never think it's just one reason why a team underperforms like this one. I think there were a lot of reasons. And I'm going to get into it at the end of the year. I'm going to do an autopsy. But if I had to pick the biggest outside of injuries, it would be the terrible offensive coaching leading up to the firing of everybody. It was really bad. Agree or disagree?
Man, I know you. I mean, you know personally how I felt about it. It was, I don't think a lot of people understood how bad it was, right? Not to knock Luke Getzey, that's not what we're here to do, but there were just certain, play calls, certain decisions that were being made that were just, it wouldn't make sense on any level of football. And I say that very respectfully. Like you remember the time you got in the car with me, and I was literally, it was the day after the game. I had literally went to sleep thinking about, hey, maybe this is why he did X, Y, and Z. Maybe this, and I literally could not come up with the reason, right? So I had to ask you the next day. That's how bad some of these calls were. And I also think just schematically, right? They kind of went away from some of the things that were working for them last year, like Zamir White. The scheme did not fit him. Now Zamir has to do some things better. He has to hit the holes. He has to find the cutback. There are some things he can do better. But at the same time, I mean, look at those last 4 games last season. How did he go from that to now he can't even get past the line of scrimmage? Like that's coaching, right? I would also say not fully. And it takes time, right, to rebuild an offensive line. But I think just as much as the quarterback is an issue here, so is the offensive line. And I think the offensive line is worse than many people realize. I personally think they could replace, they probably should replace 1, 2, maybe 3 people off that offensive line. A lot of this falls on the line.
Wow. Okay. I disagree with that take completely.
Yeah.
But I think that's an interesting take.
Mhm.
Uh, I think if you look at just the 1 week under Joe Philbin, they were exponentially better. I just hope the Raiders can stick with this group of 5 for the rest of the year and just avoid some injuries because, man, they need to get that continuity together. I want to ask you about the the mindset of the team because everyone wants the Raiders to tank, but the point is they can't, or the NFL will hammer them. And if they do tank, there's going to be players that are going to complain and they're going to get caught. So they're going to get in trouble. I mean, they just can't. And then these are men who are professional coaches, professional players. They're not losers. They didn't get to this level by accepting losing. That's just not the mentality. I know the fans hate that. But overall, I think it's really good. I mentioned on the podcast yesterday, I have a friend who played for a team that tanked. And he told me years later when he retired, the team never got good. And I asked him what happened. And he said to me, I think that the year we tanked, they allowed there to be a complacency with losing. And I just think it became like a cancer to the organization. I know the fans don't want to hear that. But at the end of the day, I think tanking, even if it does give you the number 1 pick, there isn't a Peyton Manning in this. There are warts and concerns with everybody. I just don't think you let that losing culture into your building intentionally.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between it being a losing culture and you just having a losing season. And I think that's where there's a fine line that you have to walk there. And it's a very fine line, right? Because it can quickly go from a losing season to a losing culture in 1, 2, 3, like literally maybe 2 to 3 years. And now that culture has shifted towards losing. So I don't feel like these guys are comfortable with losing. And they don't look like they're comfortable with losing. They look like they put up a fight last week. Again, score a touchdown on some of those red zone drives. It's a completely different game. So I don't think these guys enjoy losing, but I also think that they're realists, right? I think they understand the situation at hand, right? The same way we talked about injuries impacting the team. The guys know that, right? They're not ignorant to the fact that they're down half their starting lineup and, the deficiencies of the team. So I definitely think that the fact that they're still playing hard despite all that speaks volumes.
Max Crosby made a comment to me and it went viral after the Miami game. He made it to me in the locker room. But basically, he said that the team's playing for pride now. I was very shocked at the reaction to that. People telling me, "Oh, Max even admits the team quit." They haven't quit. But I think what he was saying is, basically now that we're very close to being mathematically eliminated, you got to keep putting on your big boy pants, showing up and playing at 110% because you're playing for the pride of the name on the back of the jersey and the front. I thought his comments were taken out of context. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are hurt and they're upset about how the way this season has gone. But I circle back to what we just said a moment ago. These guys know, right? Would you have rather him said, "Hey, we're going to the playoffs"? Like you got to keep it in perspective of what's reality. And he hit it right on the head, right? It's about pride. It's not about anything else but that at this point. So I can see how maybe some people took it that way, but to me, it made sense what he was getting at. And I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. We don't dress up losses. The guys in the locker room don't dress up losses. Even AP said that this is a bad team. Those that came shot out of AP's mouth. So that's all Max is kind of getting at is just being real about the situation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to turn our attention, Zeke, to a story that I reported very early Thursday morning. It was actually on the West Coast. It was late Wednesday night when I reported it, early Thursday on the East Coast, about Mark Davis, additional 15% of the team. As you know, this is a story much bigger than this, by the way. This was just a tiny part of it, but we've been working on a very big story about the Raiders and ownership and all that for several weeks, and it's coming. We're working on it, but um, Mark has total control of the organization. I like the idea of bringing in some people. He's not broke. He's doing very well. I think it brings some fresh business when you look at the two men that just joined. When you look at Seymour and Brady, I think it added football knowledge. And then, of course, another gentleman joined with them. And, I would put him in the business perspective. I like this. I like what Davis is doing. I like what he's doing for the franchise. Again, it's not a money issue. I think it's a stability issue. I'd love your thoughts on where the ownership's going.
Yeah, so listen, I like it, and I'm smiling like a silly guy because I think Mark takes a lot of heat for his lack of the football knowledge, right? Well, with these moves in terms of the 15%, you're seeing him do his thing on the business side, his strengths. So it's kind of cool to watch him, kind of do his thing on a huge level. So in terms of business, that was the key word out of everything you said. This is a business move. Obviously, you bring in Tom Brady, et cetera. That's the football side, but overall this is a business move. So I think it's pretty cool to watch Mark in his element.
I think people are undervaluing Tom Brady and his addition to this franchise. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of unknowns. I think there's a lot of unknowns, right? Because this is new even for Tom, right? This is the first time he's done it. And then obviously, if you're referencing the fans, right? I think a lot of the fans are coming from a fan standpoint, right? Of that infamous play with Tom and the Raiders. So I think that plays a lot into this. But overall, I think just because we don't know what to expect from Tom, we've never seen him do this before.
Mhm.
There's a lot of doubt. I think you give it a couple of years, start to see the kinds of moves he's making or helps make, and you might get a few more people on your side, on Tom's side.
I think people are underestimating Richard Seymour. I have a ton of respect for him as a person, as a businessman, as a football player. I am. I think Seymour is being undervalued. I think he brings a lot. I think he's a very common sense person. He's not impressed with himself. He's extremely wealthy and extremely successful, both as a businessman, as a football player. There is zero ego with him. I am a big Seymour guy. I think people are underestimating him. I'd love your thoughts.
I mean, that's to say the least, right? Anytime you hear, in terms of the ownership, you almost never even hear, Seymour's name mentioned. It's always Tom Brady. I mean, it's Tom Brady, I get it, but you almost literally never hear anything about Seymour. So he's definitely being overlooked. But you got to keep in mind that Seymour was a major part of this as well. So I think you hit it right on the head in terms of, you got the Tom Brady's in the world, you got the other owners there who are, maybe a little bit more, into themselves than what a Richard Seymour is, and I can kind of see him being that calming influence in the room.
Last question for me. If you had to pick today Who will the Raiders select with their first round pick next year?
I think so. I mean, you already told the listeners that we don't talk about this beforehand, so bear with us. But I think they're going to take Shador. I do, but I
I do
don't
too.
think it's as much of a slam dunk as everyone else thinks. A and B, I'm curious. I don't know. I'm just curious that if there might be a little. Well, first of all, let's take a step back. It depends what happens with the front office. You kind of have to settle that out first. Once you do that, you go from there. But I do think it's going to be Shador. I think that's the move that's going to get the fan base, going again, right? However, I would say be cautious. Let's assume it's Tom Telesco at the gym. I think he's going to be there if you ask me. Tom is a great, scout, right? He has scouts behind him. So he knows what he's doing when it comes to the draft. So don't be surprised if it's not Shador. I'd also say this. If they get the number one pick and they can pick any quarterback they want to, look out. You really don't know who they're going to pick at that point.
I agree with you. I think they want Shador. So I'm going to ask you this. We have been reporting Tom Brady is going to have a very loud voice. We've been reporting this for over a year. For nearly, since it was announced, we've been reporting he's going to have a loud voice. Like it or don't like it? What's your thoughts?
I like it. I mean, I feel like if you're going to bring him in, right, let's lean on things that he brings to the table. Now, I would think / hope that it's a gradual process, right? I don't think they're just going to throw everything to Tom Brady, but I do think, especially on the football side of things, I think Tom is going to have and it makes sense, right? I mean, you don't think Tom had a large voice in the places that he had success in? His track record has proven itself, so I like it.
I like it too. He's the great Ezekiel Trezevant. I'm Hondo Carpenter. Zeke, tell them where to find you on X, would you?
Yes, sir. EZ_T as in Tom, REZ as in zebra, SI, no, EZTREZ, excuse me, _ SI, EZTREZ _ SI. Yes.
All right. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.